The belief that a person who survives execution cannot legally be executed again is, for the most part, a myth. That is why many death sentences end with the words, "until dead." That means you'll ride this train to your final destination regardless of how long it takes. But it wasn't always that way. In the past, those who survived legal executions frequently escaped with their lives. It was frequently viewed as an act of God and a statement of innocence. So, the following are some examples of individuals who survived their own executions, even if only for a while. Number 1. Doyle Ham. Show the Doyle Ham story to anyone who claims that lethal injection is the most friendly way to end a prisoner's life. In 1987, he was sentenced to death by electrocution in Oklahoma. However, appeals pushed his sentencing back until electrocution was no longer popular in Oklahoma. Lethal injection was used, however there was an issue. Doyle had been diagnosed with cancer, and his physicians advised his executioners that the medications he was taking would make it impossible to obtain a vein for the injection. However, the execution team did not pay attention, and on the day of the execution, they struggled for nearly 3 hours, puncturing the individual at least 11 times in the legs, ankles, and groin, and most likely injuring multiple organs, before giving up at 11:27 p.m., as the legal death warrant had expired at midnight. Fortunately for Doyle, the brutality of the conduct resulted in a sentence modification. He was actually granted life, but the effects of cancer took his life at the age of 64. Number 2. Willie Francis. You will surely feel your blood pressure rise when you hear Willie Francis's story. Why? Well, it happened during a period of racial injustice. Willie Francis was found guilty of a crime he did not commit and sentenced to death by electrocution. The 1944 shooting death of Louisiana pharmacist Andrew Thomas remained unsolved for 9 months until Willie Francis was apprehended in Texas for a different crime. The cops say Willie was carrying the pharmacist's wallet in his pocket. On the day of his execution, Willie was finally sitting in the chair when he started to scream, take it off, let me breathe." It was discovered that the guard in charge of the electric chair did not correctly fix it since he was drunk when he set it up. Consequently, it just fried him rather than killing him. However, when Willie was eventually released, he attempted to appeal for his freedom. But after his appeal was denied, he was executed again at the age of 17 a year later. Number 3. Alireza. In October 2013, a man known only as Alireza was apprehended while attempting to smuggle crystal meth into Iran. He was scheduled to be executed by hanging and died after 12 minutes of hanging. His body was then sent to the morgue. Alireza's body was to be obtained by his family for burial the next day. However, a morgue worker detected condensation on the plastic sheet covering the condemned man. Alireza was lucky to be alive, and they hurried him to a nearby hospital. Unfortunately, Alireza's survival did not sit well with Iranian officials, who ordered that he be hanged once more after he recovered. According to their definition, they had sentenced him to death rather than hanging him. This caused global discussions, and after human rights organizations challenged their ruling, they took a step back, and Iran's justice minister announced that he would not be executed again. Number 4. Anne Green. Anne Green was a household servant at the time. Her master's grandson impregnated her one day, and the child was stillborn after the usual 9 months. When Anne attempted and failed to hide the dead baby, she was found guilty of infanticide and sentenced to death by hanging, which is where things get very interesting. After being hanged, physicians realized she had a pulse and made considerable efforts to save her life. Following her complete recovery, the judge ruled that her recovery was a sign from God that she was innocent. Number 5. John Babacom Lee. John had previously served in the British Royal Navy before becoming a thief after retirement. In 1885, John Lee's employer was discovered dead as the result of a stabbing. There was just one man in the house, John, and he had an unusual cut on his arm. Furthermore, he had a bad reputation already. So, instead of a proper trial, which many still find him not guilty, John was sentenced to death. However, on the day of his execution, they attempted to hang John 3 times, and the trapdoor on the scaffold failed to open each time. Even when they tested it without him and it functioned, the moment he was returned to the gallows, it stopped operating. However, John Lee's sentence was eventually changed to a life sentence. And in 1907, after years of appeals, he was finally released. Number 6. Zoleka Kadkoda. Society cannot function without laws, which is why they are necessary. However, there are some rules that simply should not exist, and in Iran, one of these laws caught up with a 20-year-old lady named Zoleka Kadkoda. In 1997, she was sentenced to death by stoning after being found guilty of adultery. The act of stoning her is quite awful. Before being pelted with stones, the victim must be buried up to their waist. However, halfway through the stoning, locals from Zoleka's village demanded for it to be stopped. Zoleka had stopped moving at that moment and was presumed dead. However, shortly after being carried to the morgue, she resumed breathing, prompting them to hurry her to the hospital. Zoleka survived. She finally recovered entirely, and an appeal for amnesty was submitted to the court on her behalf, requesting a full pardon. Zoleka Kadkoda's death sentence was lifted and she was released on November 26, 1997. Number 7. William Duell. In 1740, a 17-year-old named William Duell was involved in this unusual case. He was found guilty of being an accessory to Sarah Griffin's assault in England and sentenced to death. William was hung in Tyburn on November 24, 1740, along with 4 other persons, and his body was left hanging for at least 20 minutes. At the time, hanged criminals were taken to an anatomy theater to have their bodies dissected and cut up for medical education. However, the student in charge of dissecting William's body saw that the young man was still breathing slowly after being stripped and laid bare on a cutting board. Within 2 hours, he was sitting up straight. William was still alive. They discovered in the days that followed that the young man had no memory of being hanged. He was sent back to prison later that night. The public united behind him and organized protests for his release after knowing about his situation. The authorities finally agreed, and he was deported to Boston, where he lived out his days until passing away at the age of 85. Finally, the death penalty has a very long history indeed, but it has no justifiable place in the modern world. No matter how clinical the method or advanced the equipment, there is no painless, humane way to put someone to death. Also, George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "Criminals do not die by the hands of the law, they die by the hands of other men." So, what are your thoughts about today's video? Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon for more updates. See you in the next one.